Your civilization is better than Hamas's, and it is better than those of the people who sympathize with Hamas, and you should not be shy about that. Your civilization is better in every conceivable way. It is better in terms of freedom, it is better in terms of decency, and it is better materially. Again, you should not be shy about this in any way. Hamas's morality is evil. In the view of Hamas, the ultimate goal is the full destruction of all non-believers. To that end, they're willing to murder babies in their cribs, and then to plant their own kids on top of rockets in order to maximize civilian casualties they can show off to the cameras. To that end, they celebrate raping women and murdering children, and they say it themselves. It's Hamas leader Mohammed Deeb who explains, quote, "Today you Israelis are fighting divine soldiers who love death for Allah the way you love life, and who compete among themselves for martyrdom like you flee from death." It is Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh who says, "We love death like our enemies love life." Hamas brags about its actions and its goals. And we in the West somehow still fall for it, and the question is why? Why are there so many people in the West eager to make excuses for today's Nazis, barbarians who carve live children out of their pregnant mothers? Why are so many in the West trembling to find evidence of Israeli errors in their prosecution of war against Hamas so as to set up some sort of retroactive moral equivalence between the Jews and their genocidal neighbors? The answer comes in two flavors: complicity and cowardice. First, the complicit. There are those in the West who are perfectly willing to side with Hamas, perfectly willing to parrot all of their evils, to repeat all of their propaganda, all of their lies, because they do agree with Hamas about one key notion: that the West is evil and exploitative. These Hamas fellow travelers are members of the so-called decolonization coalition. They believe that the West, because it has been uniquely powerful historically, is also uniquely bad and uniquely sinful, and thus it must be torn down. They endorse the language of radical terror supporter Frantz Fanon, who declaimed in the 1960s that colonially oppressed peoples should, quote, utilize red-hot cannonballs and bloody knives to destroy their colonizers. And they endorse the ideas of Jean-Paul Sartre, who argued, quote, killing a European is killing two birds with one stone, eliminating in one go oppressor and oppressed, leaving one man dead and the other man free. Those who are powerful are the colonizers. Those who are powerless are the colonized. Everyone powerful is an oppressor, everyone powerless is oppressed. Thus we see the bizarre spectacle of Queers for Palestine. People with LGBTQ plus minus divided by sign flags marching alongside those with Palestinian flags, who would quickly murder them if they gained power over them. The fellow travelers fill the streets these days. There's a reason the Black Lives Matter movement, with all of its violence and its lies and its falsehoods, declared itself in solidarity with Hamas immediately after the atrocities of October 7th. The coalition is real, and it is, in fact, disgusting. And then there are the cowards. The cowards have spent generations apologizing for Western civilization. They've refused to acknowledge two obvious truths. First, that Western civilization has, of course, committed atrocities and evils in the past. And second, that nevertheless, Western civilization is, in fact, better than its competitors. All civilizations throughout time have attempted to engage in colonization and exploitation. Only one civilization has spent its own blood to free slaves throughout the world. All civilizations have engaged in ruthless suppression. Only one civilization has spread liberty. All civilizations have engaged in economic imperialism. Only one civilization has spread prosperity. Western civilization is great because it has provided unique good and continues to do so right now. But the cowards refuse to believe that. It seems arrogant, it seems ethnocentric, it seems so passé, it seems discriminatory. And so instead, they create a dream world in their own head in which everybody thinks exactly the same way. Thus, the sins of evil groups like Hamas, those are actually just some sort of rational result of oppression. Wouldn't you also throw a baby in an oven if you were locked in an open-air prison? Well, I mean, perhaps not. Perhaps you would never throw a baby in an oven because you know you don't think like Hamas. But put that aside. Wouldn't you? Maybe. It must be Israel's fault, because if it's not, then perhaps not all civilizations are created equal. Perhaps some civilizations are better than others. And that is not a thought that is allowed. This university, unfortunately, is a good example of this sort of thinking. Directly after the October 7th massacre, the university put out a vague statement saying, quote, to our students affected by recent acts of violence in Israel and the Palestinian territories, we are here to support you. You know, just recent acts of violence. No one could tell what those acts of violence were, or who had perpetrated them, or what was going on from that statement. Just random acts of violence, some things, as a famous congresswoman might say, happened to some people. Nothing about Hamas, nothing about the massacre, just violence of some sort anywhere, like might happen on a weekend in Chicago. Eventually, the university put out a longer statement decrying Hamas's terrorism The chancellor then attempted to beg off commenting entirely, stating, quote, "I am skeptical that those in roles like mine should frequently comment on global or world events," which is super weird because this university has routinely commented on, for example, George Floyd, or the unacceptability of racism against Black Americans, the Black Lives Matter movement. Murder of Jews, however, that's a different story. That's a little sensitive. And then a couple of weeks ago, protesters here gathered to shout a variety of garden-variety Jew-hating slogans, ranging from "Glory to the martyrs," presumably would be Hamas terrorists, to "We will liberate the land by any means necessary," presumably including burning children in their cribs. This university then proceeded to say nothing. Presumably, the university would have had something to say had white supremacist protesters shouted about George Floyd. So why the double standard? Because to declare in favor of Western values over the values of the so-called oppressed would threaten the fundamental tenets of the left. And so Hamas fans must be given moral credibility. The university wouldn't want to come down too hard on the side of civilization. That might look discriminatory. Unfortunately, because of precisely this kind of cowardice, radical anti-Western ideals are now commonplace across this nation. The West has imported hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people into our various countries who hate the West and see it as uniquely evil. You can hear many of them calling for the genocide of Jews in the Middle East. You can see their signs calling for the victory of terrorist groups ranging from Hamas to the Palestinian Authority to Palestinian Islamic Jihad. This is the most dangerous phenomenon in the West: the alliance of the radical, their fellow travelers, and the cowards. But the West does not have to surrender, and it will not. I believe that the West will once again stand up for its own principles. The West's freedoms are good. They are morally good, and they must be protected. That means opposing moral relativism. Loving freedom does not mean that every single expression is equivalently valuable. Freedoms should not be trampled upon, and those who oppose freedoms should be opposed. Yes, of course we have freedom of religion in this country, and that means that even radical Muslim citizens in this country have full rights. But that does not mean that our politicians and our administrators should cater to them. It is not quote-unquote Islamophobia to point out that defending Hamas is repulsive, or that a peculiarly small number of Muslims seem to be dissociating from Hamas or calling for their surrender. That is the reality. Reality is not Islamophobic. It is just reality. Yes, we have freedom of speech in this country, and that means that the coalition of the pseudo-oppressed, very wealthy Westerners who can stand outside with their iPhones and jabber about the evils of Israel can scream and shout outside. More power to them. They should enjoy it's a little cold outside. I hope they enjoy themselves. It also means the rest of us can recognize that support for terrorist organizations puts you well outside the so-called Overton window. Nobody has the moral obligation to hire a Hamas supporter. Now, if you're not a citizen, different story. Our civilization has no duty to welcome you in or support you if you support Hamas. You should be deported forthwith to a place more in line with the values you apparently treasure. The West has a long history of resilience. The West should not and will not go down without a fight, but that requires actual moral courage. That requires recognizing the greatness of the West and not being shy about proclaiming that greatness in the face of alternatives. It requires moral clarity. It requires the tough business of saying things that are true. If the West does say things that are true, the West will emerge successful and stronger than before. If the West does not, it will fall to the darkness. Thanks so much.